My name is Victor Furman. Some call me The Voice. I've always been fascinated with human nature, spirituality, science, and the crossroads at which they meet. Join me now and we will explore these topics and so much more with fascinating guests, authors, and experts who will guide us to Destination Unlimited. When I was born, the sun was in Capricorn, the moon was in Aquarius, and Cancer was rising. Of course, I did not know that and really was not aware of the significance of this until my mid-teens in the late 1960s. The newspaper horoscopes gave general information and attributes, but these really did not resonate with me. When I was about to enter the Air Force in 1973, my mother had a friend of hers, an amateur astrologer, do a chart for me. It did hit home with some of my characteristics and life choices, but some of the projected events made no sense until they actually unfolded. What may we learn from the planets to guide us? Is there a new approach to astrology that will enable us not only to know, but to act upon the energy of the planets and better our choices, direction, and lives? My guest this week on Destination Unlimited, Carolyne Faulkner, says there is, and she created it in her approach, dynamic astrology. Carolyne Faulkner is the resident astrologer at the Soho House Group in London. She created the concept of dynamic astrology after 15 years studying with experts from all over the world. Her approach and methods fit within a life coaching and mentoring framework, and she uses the movements of the planets to empower others to practice self-reflection and personal self-development, helping them in many areas of their lives. Her first book, The Signs, was published in 2017 to critical acclaim within the genre. Her website is dynamicastrology.com, and she joins me this week from London to discuss her just-published Harper Design book, Your Signs, an empowering astrology guide for 2020. Please join me in welcoming to Destination Unlimited, Carolyne Faulkner. Good evening, Carolyne.
Oh, hi. Good evening, Victor. It's very nice to meet you.
And lovely to have you join us. So please share with our listeners about your early path and how you found the art and science of astrology.
I think I've always been interested, and I know it probably sounds a bit cliched, but I have been quite aware since I was a child. I've started having prescient dreams when I was about 4, and I've always had sort of a heightened sense of awareness, if you like. So for me, I was on the lookout for teachers, and I didn't even know I was looking, if that makes sense.
Yes.
And so when I was in my 20s, I began working in the entertainment and media industry as a creative. And I was always really interested in the sort of psychic world and astrology and, you know, everything that sort of is banded under the umbrella, the occult umbrella. And so I knew an astrologer, but every time I asked her questions, it all seemed so complicated to me. And I think I asked her to teach me, and she just said, oh, you know, it's too complicated. And so I just had to take her word for it. So when I began working with new people, I would ask her to check their charts for me, not, you know, to find out, you know, what they had for breakfast that day or anything like that, but just to find out how I could best work with them and sort of hit the ground running. So it sort of began from there, and I worked on a project, and then I think it was I actually had a sort of, you know, I'm sure many people can relate to this, but I had sort of quite a big spiritual awakening, and it was actually quite challenging. I mean, you know, I would walk into the room and people's, you know, televisions would turn on, and it was not quite as bad as, you know, the whole, you know, horror thing, but it was pretty rough. So I went to see a healer, and she told me that I needed to start. She said that my third eye chakra, my crown chakra, had opened, and I hadn't done enough grounding work to be able to cope with it. So I really needed to start studying. So I did. So I found a school that was sort of like a mini version of Hogwarts, and I began studying meditation. And then from there, they recommended I went on, to do a sort of psychic sensitivity course. And then from there, I started studying with Tibetan Buddhist masters. So I really have been through the spiritual mill, if you like.
That's fascinating to me, because a guest I had on recently, Helene Saucedo, was also in the entertainment industry as a creative for 10 years, and then she left that and took up the art of palmistry. So it's fascinating that the two of you have that in common.
That's really interesting. I mean, I'm glad to say that I haven't really left the industry, if that makes sense. Mm-hmm. So I'm very grateful, because, I still sort of consult. They used to bring me in to, conjure up, they used to call it fairy dust. So it's when they didn't have a lot of money, but they had a problem and they couldn't solve the problem. So they needed someone to think outside of the box. And of course, I'm a sort of, I've got lots of planets in Aquarius. So I never sort of, I wouldn't allow myself or anyone else to put me inside this box. So anyway, that's kind of where my journey began. It all began really with meditation. And then I was working on a project, and I just thought it would be a really good idea to build a whole team using astrology. So that's where it all sort of came from. Now, this is back in 2005. So I hired an astrologer from the school that I used to study meditation at, and he'd never worked on a project like this before, not in this life. And so we worked together every day for 6 months. And then all of a sudden one day, because I've always been fascinated with astrology, and the thing about astrology is that, it's actually everything that we look at and we sort of talk about, sort of industries and countries, they all have a specific sign. And for me, a sign is just a manifestation of energy. And so it either goes right or it either goes wrong. And so astrology is actually governed by the planet Uranus and Aquarius. So most of the astrologers I know, or people that pick up the language very quickly, have a very strong sort of planetary stamp in the sign of Aquarius. And you've got the moon in Aquarius. Yes. Because it's like our first language. So my teacher used to say we all got off the same spaceship.
Yes, literally.
So for me, I was obsessed with learning, and I couldn't find anyone to teach me. So I sort of hired an astrologer for a project I was working on, and I ended up working with him every day. I reported to the CEO, and I worked with him, and his name was Derek Hawkins, and he was an amazing person. We used to call him Granddaddy Gnome. And so literally one day I sort of woke up and I had this aha moment. I kind of understood it. And so it all began from there, really.
Now, you had mentioned at a very young age experiencing subtle energy and having these gifts. Had anyone in your family demonstrated these? Because usually these run in families.
Yeah, my mother, who's also Capricorn, my mother is, she, everyone sort of laughs and jokes and says that she's a witch. Sometimes it's in a lovely way, and sometimes it's in a derogatory way. But it was actually my grandmother. My grandmother was deaf, and so she basically had a really heightened sense of awareness. I think sometimes if you don't have one sort of sense, your other sort of sense is very much developed. And my grandmother was Welsh, the whole Celtic Druid thing. My grandmother used to read tea leaves. So
that's wonderful. So anyone else, your grandmother, your mother, did it go back generationally?
I'm not sure, really. I mean, I should look into it a little more. I mean, possibly, but, in terms of factually, I'm not sure. That's what I can tell you off the top of my head. But I do know that, the whole, my family is English, Welsh and Irish, and the Welsh and Irish side of the family, they were very in touch with the land and the universe and sort of, pagan rituals and everything else. So, back in the time of the Druids and the Celts. So, but you see, for me, I mean, I was always rather rebellious. And so I wanted to serve, if you like, but I wanted to do it in a very cool and creative way.
Yes. Had you have an opportunity, I'm sure you have, to visit any of those ancient Celtic and Druid sites? And when you have, what did you feel there?
Yes, I have. I mean, you can talk about Glastonbury and so. I mean, I absolutely love Glastonbury, and it's a really, really special and very powerful place. I think, I've also, in terms of, ancient sacred spaces, I've also spent, I've got a second family in Mexico, and I spend a lot of time there. And I've also been to all of the pyramids and sort of Tepoztlan. But in Tepoztlan, I didn't get any, super, amazing feelings until I got to the top. And that was a hike. But I actually, there were some flashes of some not such cool stuff had happened there, actually.
Mm. So in essence, you were able to feel that energy when you visit these places, positive or negative? Yeah, I mean, that's something that I've had to learn, and I'm sure, you can relate to this, and many people listening now will also relate to. That's something I've had to learn how to turn off and to turn on, because if you're constantly tuned in, that can, you can literally lose your mind if you're always on. Absolutely. My guest is Carolyne Faulkner. She's the author of Your Signs, an empowering astrology guide for 2020. And we'll be back with more of Carolyne after these words on the OMTimes Radio Network.
OMTimes Magazine is one of the leading online content providers of positivity, wellness, and personal empowerment. A philanthropic organization, their net proceeds are funneled to support worldwide charity initiatives via Humanity Healing International. Through their commitment to creating community and providing conscious content, they aspire to uplift humanity on a global scale. OMTimes, co-creating a more conscious lifestyle.
Tune in to The Practical Intuitive, Mind, Body, Spirit for the Real World with me, host Robin Fritz, Mondays at 2 p.m. Pacific, 5 Eastern. I'll cover personal and business intuition, animal communication, mediumship, space clearing, past life regression, shamanic insights, energy healing, soul choice, and more, all to help you tap your own intuitive and healing skills. No ifs, ands, or buts.
So I'm a cat, and I just moved in with this new human, and she's got this little toy she's always playing with, all day long. Tap, 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 bloop, bloop. She can't put it down. There it is. Oh, and get this. She even talks to it. Last week, she asked it for Chinese, and guess what? Egg rolls showed up. Like magic. Humans have cool toys.
A person is the best thing to happen to a shelter pet. Be that person. Adopt. Brought to you by the Ad Council and the ShelterPetProject.org.
Adopt US Kids presents What to Expect When You're Expecting a Teenager. Learning the lingo.
GOAT, G-O-A-T, acronym, stands for Greatest of All Time. As in, spaghetti sandwiches for dinner? They're my fave. Dad, you're the GOAT.
You don't have to speak teen to be a perfect parent. Thousands of teens in foster care will love you just the same. Visit adoptuskids.org. Brought to you by the U.S. Department of Health and Human Services, Adopt U.S. Kids, and the Ad Council.
Back on Destination Unlimited, my guest this week is Carolyne Faulkner. She's the author of Your Signs, an empowering astrology guide for 2020. So at the last segment, we were talking about all of the experience that you had leading up to your fascination and work with astrology. How has the study and understanding of astrology changed your life?
I mean, really, I think it's made me a much more compassionate person. And it also enables me to understand the ebbs and flows of life. And also, I think it's enabled me to crack the code, the hardest code to crack of them all, which is human behavior.
Yes, absolutely. If you had to explain the fundamental aspects of astrology to someone who, let's say, just arrived from another planet, what would you tell them?
I would say that astrology is basically a language used to interpret energies, and that could be the energy of a person or the energy of a day. That sort of thing.
And how did we arrive? What's a little bit of the history of astrology?
Well, I mean, we've used it for, many, many, many moons. And, I believe it began back in Mesopotamia. But it used to be a farming calendar. We used to use the sort of moon cycles and the moon phases. And we used to follow the planets in terms of when and how and what to harvest. So it was I think it was the royal family. They basically had an astrologer draw a chart for one of the first princes to try and sort of predict, whether, he was going to have a successful life and a successful reign. So it began in the street, as most people, most things do. It was a sort of farming calendar, and then all of a sudden it went to the elite, which is kind of the way that things go these days also. And then it sort of became, quite mainstream. I mean, even, here I'm really glad now that some of the sort of period dramas are starting to include, they're touching on the way that astrologers actually guided all the royals many moons ago. I don't know if they still do. But, certainly Queen Elizabeth I, her astrologer was a guy called John Dee. And he was actually incredible at what he did. But you see, back in those days, Victor, you couldn't just study astrology for a year and then come out and say you were an astrologer. You had to be an incredibly learned person to claim that you were an astrologer. You had to have studied biology. You had to have studied anatomy. You had to have some sort of, repertoire of herbs. You needed to know you needed to be a mathematician. It wasn't just a case of reading a couple of books and launching a practice.
If you had to, let's say we just met someone who knows nothing about astrology, you sort of touched upon the basics of it. How did the planets and their positions and all of these things come into play at the moment of our birth?
So imagine that everything is constantly moving, everything is impermanent. And when someone is born, it's almost like a cosmic snapshot of the stars when that person was born. And it forms a sort of very sort of loosely sketched in pencil roadmap for them.
And would you call this an energetic imprint?
Yeah, I would actually, but I don't believe that anything is fixed, because I've changed things and I've helped my clients to change things too. I think that with awareness, you can sort of, you can change things. I don't believe that our future is sort of, all predestined. I believe that, do you remember those books years ago? And it used to say, oh, well, if you read, do you choose to go through the green door? And if you do, flick to page 33. Yes. Or do you choose to go through the red door? Okay, we'll go to page 77. Do you see what I mean?
Yes.
I don't believe that it's all so sort of fixed, because a chart is just a tool that you have to work with. It's not you, and it's our job to find out, who's behind the chart.
Now, with the advent of better astronomical research tools like the Hubble telescope, have any of the traditional approaches and thoughts changed? For example, poor Pluto was downgraded to a planetoid. How did that affect the science?
Well, I mean, just if I may touch on the whole Pluto thing, I mean, I can tell you now that Pluto transits do not mess about. Pluto is about birth, death, transformation, and change. And as someone who's studied Pluto transits, they really do affect us. But most of the time, when someone has a lot of power, it's sort of, it's the law of the universe to try and disempower them. So first of all, Pluto was downgraded to a dwarf planet. And now I think, what is it now? An asteroid, a dwarf asteroid, yes, or whatever it is. So, but, Pluto doesn't care. I think in terms of, there are, we're talking about a multiverse here, not just a universe. And I think, the practice of astrology is we only study certain aspects. If we were to study all of them, we would be there for hundreds and hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of years. I mean, there are more stars in space than there are grains of sand on Earth. So do you know what I mean? So I think for astrology, it's almost like it's just concentrate. It's almost like, when you're talking about, if you're an artist, the first thing you begin with are the primary colors. I believe that astrology is like that. The first thing you begin with are the sort of, primary sort of planets and stars that are sort of, relatively close to us here on Earth. Does that make sense?
Absolutely. So the discovery that's made by the Hubble telescope and the satellites that have transited beyond the edges of the solar system of new moons and those types of things, those really aren't incorporated into the practice.
I mean, I'm sure some people do, but the thing is that, this is where astrology, it's really interesting because I've always asked the question and I've always said, well, because the thing is that, when we're talking about astronomy, we're talking about, we look at everything from a heliocentric perspective, whereas astrology actually looks at everything from a geocentric perspective. Yes. So it's sort of, do you see what I'm saying? And, I can't explain all the sort of, the sort of, science and, astronomy and everything else behind it. But, what I will say is I'm definitely not an airy-fairy person. And I've studied this for, I don't know, like 15 years now. And the thing is that, all I do know is that it works.
Absolutely. When things go wrong, especially with communications, we've all heard someone say or thought to ourselves, Mercury must have gone retrograde. What exactly does that mean, and how much truth is there that the idea fouls things up?
Well, Mercury and I are quite good buddies, and Mercury's had enough of all this negative press. He wants to know how he gets so much blame for so many things that go wrong. I'm just kidding. So the thing is that, I don't subscribe to the sort of, that school of thought, that basically, when a planet is retrograde, it's negative. The thing is that a retrograde sort of planet is actually, it's not actually retrograde. It's an optical illusion based on where we're looking from on Earth. So you see, all of this sort of negativity, it sort of came about because many, many years ago when we were very God-fearing folk, we would basically, look up to the stars and it would look as if, Mars or Mercury every so often was literally, taking a hike from us, running away from us. So we always, looked at that as a really bad omen. So, that's where a lot of it came from my perspective. Mercury retrograde it's not bad and it's not good, but I don't think anything is good or anything is bad because the soul is infinite. And just because you're having a bad experience, it doesn't mean to say that it's, going to have a negative impact on your soul ultimately in the long run. And it is a long run.
Well, for general communications then, do we really need to prepare when Mercury appears to be dancing backwards?
I would say to take different precautions because Mercury retrograde is more reflective than active. So, for instance, it's almost like, yes, there are probably, there could be delays, but the thing is that it happens 3 or 4 times a year. So if someone's constantly late and blaming Mercury retrograde, they can only get away with it 3 or 4 times a year, but that's still quite a lot. Mm. So I think you should definitely prepare for it. I mean, Derek Hawkins used to say a Mercury retrograde is like being on a plane. You're delayed on the tarmac. You know that it's going to take off eventually, but you don't know when. There's no point getting your we'd say here, getting your knickers in a twist. There's no point doing that. Because the thing is that you're just going to end up upsetting yourself and everybody else. In life, it doesn't matter what's going on. It's how you respond or react to it.
So it's really the old story of which came first, the chicken or the egg. So someone once had a bad time, and it happened during Mercury retrograde, and they said, aha, they used it as an excuse on a go-forward basis.
Exactly. But to say, I'm not going to sign anything or buy anything electrical when Mercury's retrograde, it's not logical. It's fear-mongering.
Are the signs immutable, or do they change through the years?
In terms of people's star signs, or what
the signs themselves, do they ever change? Or are they sort of a constant?
The signs are a constant in terms of how they play out, but they get stronger and weaker depending on how they're aspected. So it's like sometimes they're in the spotlight and sometimes they're not.
An aspect, just explain that for those who don't know what an aspect is.
So basically, when you're born, you have this cosmic selfie, if you like, a snapshot of the stars when you were born. And then what happens is everything moves around in the universe, and every now and again, it hits something in your own chart, and that is called an aspect.
My guest is Carolyne Faulkner. She's the author of the just published book. It actually was published yesterday, and you can buy it right now. It's called Your Signs, an Empowering Astrology Guide for 2020. Carolyne, please tell our listeners where they can get your book and find out more about you and this amazing work.
I'm so excited about Your Signs. So I believe it is in Barnes & Noble. You can also buy it on Amazon. I believe it's in Urban Outfitters. I believe it's also available in Target, although I'm not sure. And my website is dynamicastrology.com, and that's where you'll find me. I'm not particularly marvelous on social media. I do have someone who works with us on that, and that's at Dynamic Astrology or at Carolyne Faulkner Official.
And we'll be back with more of Carolyne and Your Signs after these words on the OMTimes Radio Network.
You're listening to OTR-FM, part of the IOM Radio Network.
Humanity Healing International is a small nonprofit with a big dream. Since 2007, HHI has been working tirelessly to bring help to communities with little or no hope. Our projects are not broad mandates, nor are they overnight solutions, but they bring the reassurance that no one is alone and that someone cares. To learn more, please visit humanityhealing.org. Humanity Healing is where your heart is.
1 in 3 adults has prediabetes. That means it could be you, your best man, your worst man. Take the risk test at doihaveprediabetes.org to know where you stand. Brought to you by the Ad Council and its prediabetes awareness partners.
Hi, I'm your host, Smokey Cole Bear. Filling in for Smokey, because after 75 years of...
Only you can prevent wildfires.
Turns out there's much more to say. Nearly 90% of wildfires are caused by us humans being careless, dumping our used barbecue coals willy-nilly. Guess the song was wrong. We did start the fire. That's why I respect Mother Nature and her trees, whether coniferous or new car scented. Brought to you by the U.S. Forest Service, your state forester, and the Ad Council.
Back on Destination Unlimited, my guest this week is Carolyne Faulkner. She's the author of Your Signs, an Empowering Astrology Guide for 2020. So when did you realize a new approach to astrology was needed?
When I was searching for a teacher, and it was all so complicated, and every book I read, I literally quit after 5 pages. And so for me, I made it sort of a mission to make it simple and easy and cool again. So that was about, I began that process. I used to work on live television, and back in those days, everyone used to sort of, think that if you're an astrologer, you had to have a crystal ball and, wear, big hoop earrings and scarf. So I wore jeans and Converse and, T-shirts with slogans on and things like that. So I started changing it up then. That was back in 2007, because it was all very much rose quartz crystals and dolphins. And whilst that's, very beautiful, I realized that I needed to appeal to a different audience, because we already had the audience that, was spiritual and knew about spirituality. And I feel like it's almost like going into an art gallery. It can be really intimidating if you don't know anything about art. So it's really good to try and break things down. And so that became my sort of mission back then.
I understand that there's a resurgence in an interest in astrology, especially among young people between the ages, I think, something like 18 to 30. And I think that this is something that would definitely appeal to them.
100%. But when I started saying that this was going to happen about 12 years ago, and everyone was saying to me, astrology is dying, astrology is dead, it's not going to happen. And I said, I'm telling you now, it really isn't. And so I'm not, saying this in an arrogant way, but I've definitely been a key player in the movement. I also, was, very blessed to have met the founder of Soho House, and that was in 2006. And then by 2008, I was the first astrologer to ever host any sort of talks and workshops, because he just said, well, he's very practical Virgo. He said, I'm not too sure, what I believe about astrology. He said, but, what I do know is that my members, not only will they love you, but they'll love astrology too. So, I always made it my mission to appeal to an audience that we didn't yet have in the spiritual community.
Wonderful. Now, what is dynamic astrology, and how does it differ from the traditional practice?
So dynamic astrology was literally born after I actually my friend dragged me along to a seminar. It was an NLP seminar. Do you know the neuro-linguistic programming?
Absolutely, yes.
Yeah, so I went to one of those seminars, but I couldn't really relate to it too much. But I came out of there and I sort of said, Jeepers creepers, I need to do this with astrology. This is what I need to do. I need to make it accessible. And so it began from there. And then one day I literally had a eureka moment, because every time you show somebody a birth chart, it's kind of complicated, right?
Absolutely.
There are all these lines. And I used to have clients that were saying, oh, but I've got so many red lines. Does that mean that, I've got a bad chart, or are the blue lines good? So I just woke up one morning. Now, bear in mind, no one had done this yet. And I just said, I'm going to create charts that don't have any lines in them, because my eureka moment was, wow, everyone has planets and everyone has a little sprinkling of each of the signs in their charts. But it doesn't matter if you've got trines or, conjunctions or semi-sextiles. They either go right or they either go wrong. And that was my eureka moment. And that is the crux of the code. You have to learn about the planet, the sign, and the house, and the gone right and gone right and gone wrong potentials. And then you just magnify the gone right and diminish the sort of gone wrongs. So that is dynamic astrology. And I created it within, because I've been a coach for years. So I created it within a sort of, from a life coach's perspective.
So can dynamic astrology be used to predict important moments in our personal lives?
It can illuminate them, I would say. So, for instance, when we were just having a little chat and I was saying, well, if someone's got, the sun in Capricorn, then, in the heavens, the big planet Saturn moved into the sign Capricorn in December 2017. So, for that 2 years, you've got sort of a very, the discerning eye of Saturn on your sun sign. And in dynamic astrology, it breaks it all down. So it says, right, your sun sign, also known as the star sign, think of it as if it's like a wardrobe. So the sun is it's like an energetic wardrobe. So your sun sign is like your jacket that you put on. Your rising sign is like your mask, or for women or men who wear it, makeup. Mm-hmm. And sort of Venus is your heart. The moon is your emotions. Your Mars is your energy. Does that make sense?
Absolutely. I'm going to do a little share. I wasn't going to talk about myself during this program, but I have to do a share based on what you just said. So December of 2017, Capricorn has the influence of Saturn. And that implies, what does that imply just for our listeners? And then I'll tell you what happened to me.
Well, Saturn is, when you've got Saturn on your case, it basically asks you to take, in some ways, this is not like, predictive. It asks you to assess what is really real in your life. And it can sometimes, it asks you to master certain life lessons. And sometimes it makes you work really hard on all the areas that you've made commitments to.
So come June of 2018, a company that I had worked for in total for over 30 years, originally working for the current owner's father and now working for the son, or then working for the son. And I was dissatisfied with, shall we say, the way I was being treated and the compensation I was receiving for the contributions I was making to the business. And in June of 2018, we had a meeting, And I had mentioned to a coworker that if he even looked cross-eyed at me at the meeting, I would be out of there. And within 2 minutes, something was said. I said, "Excuse me, I have to leave." I went back to my desk, prepared my letter of resignation. He sent someone to grab me and bring me back, and I handed them the letter of resignation. I cleaned out my desk, and I left at the age of 65 with nothing else planned, no opportunities planned. And I said, enough is enough. 3 hours later, the gentleman sent out an email saying that I was no longer with the company, wishing me well in my future endeavors. And within another hour, I had 3 offers for better positions with companies that I respected and trusted.
But you see, isn't that funny? Because Saturn is all about respect.
That's it.
Saturn is all about respect. And because the thing is, and what Saturn does is that it forces you to take off the rose-tinted glasses, if you like, and review all of the things that we've made. That's really interesting. So Absolutely. The build-up, it would have, but you see what happens. So say, for instance, your Saturn was at, 12 degrees of Saturn in the sky was at 12 degrees of Capricorn and your sun was at 12 degrees of Capricorn. You can bet your bottom dollar that it basically connected the time when you said, right, I'm writing that letter of, I'm not getting respect here, so I'm going to leave. And also because you've got the moon in Aquarius is the rebel. Mm-hmm. So it's kind of like, you know what? I'm 65 years old. I'm going to do something else. But you see, what Saturn does is that it rewards you for hard work always.
And a month later, I was working with a new company. I actually knew many of the people because I've been friends with them in the industry for many years. And a year and a couple of months later, I can say it's the happiest I've been in years.
Is it? But you see that, but that's the thing. So you see, I always say that Saturn is like the queen of the zodiac, like our British queens, they used to love chopping people's heads off, so it was like, Saturn is like off with their heds. Yes. I'm not getting respect here. It's really funny. It's like, sometimes when you say, if someone's being really mean or something else, I mean, I'm the nicest person in the world to a point, but I am Aquarius. And I remember someone, having a real go at me. And I just said, I don't accept your gift of anger. Yeah. And I bid you good night. Life is too short. And everyone was really shocked. Because my moon's Capricorn, and it's kind of, if you're not being valued and if you're not being respected, life is too short.
Absolutely. How do you use dynamic astrology as a life coach?
Exactly as I just did then. So the first thing I do when I'm working with a client, irrespective of who they are and what their goals are, is we work around their chart. So I like them to become aware of what they've got to play with. So it's almost like, a car salesperson showing you, here's the Bose speakers, and this is, if you turn off the ESP, then, you're going to wheel spin around the corner. I make them aware of their charts, and then I ask them to do a little bit of homework, because I'm not the kind of coach that will just sit and feed people stuff. That's a therapist, and I'm not a therapist. I look for results. So that's the first thing I do, and then we sort of go from there. But it sort of depends. I mean, I've got clients I've been working with for years, and they just want to know when good times are to do certain things and what's going on with their charts. And sometimes I look at their partner's charts or their children's charts or their colleagues' charts. Do you know what I mean? But my first thing is, I like them to learn more about their own chart, because when you've learned about your own chart, then you can start drawing other people's.
Do you find there's a lot of people who want the answers but don't want to do the work?
Yeah, I do.
And how do you address that with them?
I'm quite tough in a way, because the thing is that in this life, nobody is coming to save us. We have to put the work in if we want results. Otherwise, it's like building sandcastles in the sand. You can have a session with me, 45 minutes later, you're going to feel great, you're going to feel positive, but it's just like candy floss. You put it in as soon as you put it in your mouth, it's disappeared. And I believe that that's a waste of their sort of time and money, and a waste of my time and energy. We have to put the work in, and if we put the work in, we will always be rewarded. This life is just a drop in the ocean, and if we put the work in and realize, who we really are, and what we are attracting in our lives, and and the lessons that keep sort of reoccurring. If we stop blaming externally and look at ourselves, then we can progress.
My guest is Carolyne Faulkner. She's the author of the brand new book just published yesterday and available now. It's called Your Signs, an Empowering Astrology Guide for 2020. We'll be back with more of Carolyne after these words on the OMTimes radio network.
Ascending Hearts is no ordinary dating site, but a spiritual dating site with a purpose, to link you with your soulmate. We engineer the serendipity so you can trust that you will attune with someone that has the same matching vibration as you. Ascending Hearts, the conscious dating site for the spiritually aware. Try Ascending Hearts for free. AscendingHearts.com.
Change and growth are part of natural life, and also part of your spiritual life. Everyone needs support and guidance, especially during life passages. Upgrade yourself with the OMTimes Experts program. With OMTimes Experts, you have access to the best intuitive coaches, spiritual teachers, counselors, astrologists, and oracles. Our team was carefully selected so you can trust. Find out more at experts.omtimes.com.
For those fortunate enough to help the person who has always been their hero, find the care guides you need to help at aarp.org/caregiving. Brought to you by AARP and the Ad Council.
Hi, it's Olivia Munn with my shelter pets, Frankie and Chance, reminding you that when you adopt a shelter pet, you discover all the things that make them unique. Adopt pure love at theshelterpetproject.org. Brought to you by the Ad Council, the Humane Society of the United States, and Maddie's Fund.
Imagine being fired because of who you love. Imagine being denied medical treatment because of who you marry. Imagine being evicted because of who you are. Millions of Americans don't have to imagine this. They have to live it. Because in 30 states, it's legal to discriminate against LGBT people. Get the facts at beyondido.org. Brought to you by the Gill Foundation and the Ad Council.
Back on Destination Unlimited, my guest this week, Carolyne Faulkner. She's the author of Your Signs, an Empowering Astrology Guide for 2020. What inspired you to write Your Signs?
Well, after my first book, The Signs, it's still doing well. In fact, it was in the window of Waterstones on Piccadilly last week, and that's akin to making the cover of Vogue for an author. That's amazing. So anyway, I did that, and then I write a monthly sort of astrology forecast for Tatler's Tatler Magazine's online website. I don't write horoscopes because I don't really believe in them. I don't think it's logical to band the whole world into, just one star sign and, believe that that's it. I like people to know their moon sign, their rising sign. You know what I mean?
Yes.
So I write a monthly column for Tatler, and they sort of gave me free rein with it. And then one of the editors, her name is Lydia, from HarperCollins UK, was following my articles. So she contacted my literary agent and asked me if I could write a sort of astrological journal for the whole of 2020. And that's how it sort of came about.
And it's described as an illustrated interactive journal. How will readers use it?
I'm so excited about this one. Honestly, this really is my baby. Well, basically, it's not just astrology, because I'm a qualified yoga teacher. And as you know from our conversation, I've been studying the mind through meditation since 2006. So this journal actually gives everybody a sort of breakdown of what's happening every month throughout 2020, but it also gives weekly breakdowns, and it tells you what sign the moon is in every time it changes, which is every 2.5 days, and also whenever major planets move, and it sort of gives tips on what to do and how to handle it. But because I'm a life coach and I don't like to just feed people with information, it's actually interactive, and I've designed missions every week for people to do based on the astrology.
And describe some of those.
So, for instance, it also has a segment that says signs in the spotlight. And at the beginning of the book, it helps you to sort of map out your chart. So you can either use it in a really loose and breezy way, or you can draw out your chart and, go with it that way. So in terms of the mission, so for instance, now we're in Scorpio season until the 22nd, 23rd of November. So, for instance, this is all about emotion. So what I've done is one of the weekly missions is sort of 10 minutes of meditation, and I explain to people how they can do that really simply. And I also give them very simple yoga movements, step by steps, that are hip openers, because in the hips, we actually hold on to a lot of emotional tension and anxiety. So even if you've never done yoga before, you're still going to be able to do these very simple hip opening exercises. And so, for instance, when there's a lot of Aquarius in the sort of collective energy, people can get vibed out. So one of the sort of homeworks for for 5 days is to switch your phone off at 7:00 and not have it in your bedroom.
That's wonderful. So by making it interactive, you're really drawing the reader in to do the work.
Yeah, but I did the same with the signs. I mean, I always write these books in two ways, because as an Aquarian, I like to have choice. So you don't have to sort of, delve deep, but for the best results, I would say, delve deep, because this is like having a life coach in the back of your pocket.
That's pretty cool. That's nice to have that concept.
Well, it's my job.
Please share another of the techniques that you offer your readers.
Well, for instance, when there's a sort of a full moon in Taurus, for instance, full moons, human beings comprise approximately 65% water, and it's a scientifically proven fact that new moons and especially full moons have a very big gravitational pull on big bodies of water. So it also, impacts us as human beings. So for instance, I remember one Sunday, I think in a journal, there's the full moon in Taurus. So Taurus, how to work with that correct? Because the thing is that full moons can make people very reactive and overreactive. So I suggest to people that they don't use public transport, they walk to their parks, they spend time in nature, and also they cook, which is Taurus gone right, creating something with their hands, from scratch. And I also suggest that maybe they try and make something that's karma free. So, no animals.
So that full moon actually raises the tide of the sea within us.
Well, exactly. And if see, the thing is, in the East, in monasteries in the East, they actually take vows of silence under the full moon, because they believe that the karma is magnified under the full and the new moon. So they spend the whole day praying sort of for world peace and everything else. And if you think about it, under the full and new moons, everything we say, do, and think, the karma is magnified. So that every time there's one of those full moons or new moons, I coach people, but it's I make it very simple, but it's really multifaceted. So if you think like not going on public transport, well, people lose their rag on public transport all the time. If there's a delay and someone's not, that's why they called it lunacy.
Yes.
Full moon, lunatic, lunacy, and
absolutely, and why the werewolves come out at the full moon, right? Is it possible for someone who is experiencing what you call gone wrong moments to turn these around?
Oh yes, it's a minute by minute choice. I have Pisces midheaven, and if I have one glass of something rather lovely in a bar, I can either stay until the witching hour and use my Pisces gone wrong, or I can use my Pisces gone right, come home and get up at 5 and meditate. It's a moment by moment choice, unless the person is thoroughly wicked, and thankfully there are not that many people in the world that are thoroughly wicked. It's just they tend to get a lot of publicity.
Absolutely. Do you also look at events for nations and the world?
Oh yes, I'm obsessive.
Now, with all of the political changes in both the U.S. and the U.K., what does 2020 hold for our respective nations?
Well, what's good about this journal, and I hope I'm not shamelessly plugging it, but all my research is throughout the whole of the introduction, which is basically my theory of what's going to happen in 2020. And I'm not saying, in a predictive way, but you see, we haven't seen the alignments that we've got kicking in towards the tail end of 2020 until and since the 1960s. And in the 1960s, you see, what happened was Saturn was in Aquarius and Jupiter was in Aquarius. And in 1962, when they were aligned, after the big civil rights movement, finally, the Civil Rights Act was enacted. All these are Aquarian things, because Aquarius is doesn't care about a gender, race, creed, or color. It just cares about the person and their character. So do you see? So Aquarius is about freedom, tolerance, equality, raising above prejudice and sort of discrimination. And so this all kicked off first time in the 1960s. And so we also, the first man walked on the moon. I think you guys put him up there, didn't you? Wasn't his name Buzz? I was going to say Buzz Lightyear. I think that's...
Well, Buzz Aldrin and Neil Armstrong, yes.
That's right. I was going to say Buzz Lightyear. I think that's a cartoon program, Caroline.
Yes.
But anyway, so, the first man walked on the moon, which is all very Aquarian. Aquarian is like cosmic, interplanetary travel. And also Aquarius rules the media industry, not the show. The show is Leo, which is like, look at me. Aquarius is the one behind the back plugging it into the masses. And the first transatlantic television program broadcast in the 1960s as well, which was all about Aquarius. Now, we haven't seen this planetary alignment since then, and it kicks in towards the tail end of 2020 again. So I've been calling it the new age of Aquarius, which is all about revolution. But we've got to make this revolution one of higher consciousness and love, because it could so easily just be ruled by anger.
So do you see for the end of 2020 harmony and love abounding?
If we keep doing what we're doing, yeah, I do.
Wonderful. Tell us about the Soho Group.
The Soho House Group, well, it's a secret. If you speak about what goes on in the houses outside of the houses, you're out of the houses.
Okay. But just generally speaking, what can people find there if they go there?
Well, the Soho House Group is, I'd say, the most incredible private members club on the planet, I think. But I haven't been to them all, and I would say that because I've worked with them for over 12 years. It's a private members club that's for the creative industries, and its power is in connecting people and connecting like-minded people, and the sort of events and access you have to creativity is unrivaled. I mean, it was founded by a gentleman called Nick Jones in, I think it was 1995, the first one launched in London. And he realized that there wasn't anywhere that you could go that was a safe space for people to meet, create, speak, without sort of, blabbermouths and, repeating what you'd said, or, it's like a big family. It's just in Europe, I think there are 30,000 members. So, there are no mobile phones allowed in the house. You're not allowed to take photographs, but that's just because there are really a lot of high profile people in the houses, and they just want to be somewhere where they're not hounded by people for, because when you become sort of, that high profile, everybody wants something from you. Whereas in the houses, it doesn't matter, who you are or what you do. You just you go there and everybody works there. They have meetings there, and they're just amazing. And so they launched in London. Then the next one was in Soho House. But Nick Jones launched the one in the Meatpacking District before the Meatpacking District was the Meatpacking District. Do you know what I mean? It really
yes.
District.
What would you like your readers to take away from your signs?
I would like my readers, first of all, to feel like they're not alone, and I feel like there are so many powerful forces around us at the moment, and we all have to connect. And whether that's, physically is probably, not possible, but we can all, even these missions, I was just saying that, in one of the months, I ask everyone, I think it's Pisces, to stop eating fish because we're over farming, to give the oceans a chance to breathe, and if everyone does all of these missions, it's like together we are so powerful. So and sometimes people can feel so alone, and they don't have to, because, our souls, we're all connected. It doesn't matter where we live or where we're from. When we leave this planet, and that's one thing we all have in common, our souls will connect again. So it's Absolutely. Like you're never alone.
My guest is Carolyne Faulkner. She's the author of Your Signs, an empowering astrology guide for 2020. Carolyne, one more time, please tell our listeners where they can get your book and find out more about you and this amazing work.
Well, thank you, Victor. The book is available, of course, on Amazon. It's also available in Barnes & Noble. Is I said Barnes & Noble? Yeah, Barnes & Noble. And I believe it's in Urban Outfitters. I also believe it's in Target. And please do buy it and send us feedback on sort of Instagram or on Twitter. And my website is dynamicastrology.com, and I've written my own chart calculator on there, and there's a free version. There's also a premium version, but you get loads of information for free, because I just want you to be able to learn the beautiful language of the stars.
Carolyne, thank you so much for joining us this week, sharing your wisdom, and may the stars for all of us align with peace and happiness.
Namaste.
Thank you for joining us on Destination Unlimited. I'm Victor the Voice Furman. Have a wonderful week.